When you close your eyes for the first time sleeping in space, nothing feels dark, because even darkness is a direction. In space, there are no directions. Chris Hadfield, on his first night trying to sleep at the ISS, didn't know where his head was. He couldn't tell if his face was pointing down or up. He couldn't distinguish between falling and floating, and from that moment on, sleep was never the same again. This is the story of why the human brain breaks down in zero gravity, and how one astronaut fought through the most terrifying nights of his life. Before understanding what happened to Chris Hadfield on his first night in space, we need to understand how human consciousness actually works. You think you see the world objectively. You think your brain receives images from your eyes, processes them, and creates your understanding of reality. But this is only partially true. Your brain doesn't just use vision. It uses multiple redundant systems to create a consistent model of reality. Your eyes provide visual information, but your inner ear provides gravitational information. Your skin provides pressure and temperature information. Your muscles provide position information. Your bones provide stress information. All of these systems work together to create your sense of self and place. On Earth, all these systems agree. When you're standing, your eyes see the horizon as horizontal. Your inner ear senses gravity pulling downward. Your feet feel pressure from the ground below. Your brain integrates all this information and creates a unified model. I am standing upright on solid ground. But in space, this integration breaks down catastrophically. When Chris Hadfield entered the ISS, his eyes could see the station's interior, but his inner ear sensed no gravity. His feet felt no ground pressure. His muscles sensed no weight, and suddenly his brain received contradictory signals that it had never encountered before in human evolution. I opened my eyes and my brain was fine, says Chris. I could understand intellectually where I was. But when I closed my eyes, something broke inside my head. Buried deep inside your skull, behind your ears, are two small fluid-filled chambers called the vestibular system. These organs contain specialized cells that detect motion and gravity. They're incredibly sensitive. They can detect motion as small as millimeters per second. On Earth, these organs perform two critical functions. First, they sense gravity and tell your brain which direction is down. Second, they sense rotation and acceleration, telling your brain how your head is moving. This information is so fundamental to consciousness that your brain relies on it absolutely. In fact, if the vestibular system provides information, your brain will believe it over your eyes. This is why you can experience vertigo. If your inner ear is inflamed, it sends false signals to your brain saying you're spinning. Your brain believes the inner ear over your eyes, and you experience the sensation of the room spinning, even though you know intellectually that the room isn't moving. In space, the vestibular system encounters something it has never encountered in human evolution: the complete absence of gravity. Your inner ear can detect gravity as a physical force pulling the fluid inside those chambers. When gravity disappears, the fluid simply floats. The specialized cells get no signal. The inner ear sends no down signal to the brain. Your brain responds with confusion. It's not that you experience no sensation, you experience wrong sensation. Your brain, expecting gravity, interprets the zero signal as, I'm falling in all directions simultaneously. The best way I can describe it, says Chris, is that my inner ear was telling my brain that I was falling constantly, not in one direction, in all directions at once. Every direction felt like down. December 21st, 2012. Chris Hadfield's Soyuz capsule docked with the ISS. The hatch opened. He floated through. He was now 400 kilometers above Earth, orbiting at 28,000 kilometers per hour. His crewmates showed him around the station. There were experiments to see, equipment to understand, systems to learn. For the first hours, his brain was occupied. The novelty and intellectual challenge of operating in a new environment kept his vestibular confusion at bay. But then evening came. It was time to sleep. A crew member showed Chris to the sleep station. It was small, basically a sleeping bag attached to the station's wall. "You get in here," they explained. "Zip it closed. The zippered compartment prevents you from floating away while you sleep." Chris had trained for this. He knew what to expect. Or at least, he thought he did. He climbed into the sleeping bag. It was snug and comfortable. He pulled the zipper closed. The slight enclosure felt secure. He put on his eye mask, a light-blocking visor that astronauts use to create darkness, and then he closed his eyes and tried to sleep. Nothing was right. "The moment I closed my eyes," says Chris, "I felt like the ISS was rotating underneath me, or above me. I couldn't tell. I felt like I was simultaneously falling downward and being pushed upward. My stomach churned. My heart started racing. His eyes snapped open. The eye mask blocked the light, but his other senses, his eyes detecting the slight pressure of the mask, his skin detecting the sleeping bag fabric, provided enough sensory input that his brain calmed down. I had to keep opening my eyes every few seconds," he explains, "because when I closed them, my brain went haywire." This wasn't a minor discomfort. This was genuine panic. Chris's primitive brain, the ancient part that handles survival, was screaming that something was desperately wrong. Every few seconds he'd open his eyes. His brain would get visual confirmation that he was inside a spacecraft, that nothing was falling, that he was safe. He'd close his eyes again, and within seconds, the panic would return. This cycle continued for hours. What Chris was experiencing is well understood by neuroscience. When your sensory systems provide conflicting information, when your inner ear says you're falling but your eyes say you're in a safe room, your brain enters a state of alarm. This is because your brain evolved to prioritize survival information over comfort. If your inner ear says you're falling, that's an emergency. Your brain triggers a fight or flight response. Adrenaline floods your system. Your heart rate increases. Your muscles tense. This response happens whether or not the danger is real. Your brain doesn't care if the vestibular signal is accurate. It just knows that conflicting sensory information indicates a potential catastrophic problem. Additionally, there's a phenomenon called Coriolis illusion. When your head moves in zero gravity, your inner ear detects the movement. But without gravity as a reference, your brain can't properly interpret this movement. It sometimes experiences the sensation of spinning in impossible directions. "If I turned my head to the left," says Chris, "I'd feel like I was also somehow rolling backward and upward simultaneously. It was geometrically impossible, but my brain insisted it was happening." This Coriolis illusion creates a sensation similar to severe vertigo. It's profoundly disorienting and often causes nausea. Chris didn't sleep that first night. Not at all. He tried repeatedly, but each time he closed his eyes, the panic returned. By morning, though morning is arbitrary on a spacecraft orbiting Earth every 90 minutes, Chris was exhausted. He'd been awake for approximately 24 hours and was running on adrenaline and stress hormones. Mission Control noticed. They could see his vital signs were elevated. His stress hormones were high. When they spoke to him on radio, they could hear the exhaustion in his voice. Mission Control was concerned, recalls Chris. They asked if I was okay. I had to admit that I hadn't slept. That was a serious problem. Astronauts need sleep to function properly. Sleep deprivation affects decision-making, coordination, and mood. For astronauts on a mission where critical tasks require precision, sleep deprivation is dangerous. NASA had protocols for this. They had medications. They had suggestions. But first, they wanted Chris to try again the next night. Night 2 was somewhat better. Chris had been warned about what to expect, so the panic was slightly less intense, but he still didn't sleep well. He managed perhaps 2 to 3 hours of fitful, interrupted sleep. By day 3, he was experiencing significant sleep deprivation effects. He was irritable. His concentration was poor. He made mistakes in routine tasks. NASA's response was to provide Chris with melatonin, a natural sleep hormone supplement. Melatonin helps regulate sleep-wake cycles and can help people fall asleep despite unusual circumstances. Chris took melatonin before attempting sleep on night 3. The medication helped somewhat. It made him drowsy, which gave his vestibular panic less opportunity to fully activate before he fell asleep. He managed approximately 4 to 5 hours that night. But melatonin comes with side effects. It can cause vivid dreams and nightmares. I had the most terrifying nightmares, says Chris. Not the normal kind of bad dreams. These were geometrically impossible nightmares. I was falling through non-Euclidean spaces, directions that don't exist in physics. These nightmares were the brain's interpretation of the vestibular confusion, amplified by the melatonin's effects on REM sleep. By night 4, Chris's body was adapting. The panic was still there when he closed his eyes, but it was slightly less intense. His brain was beginning to filter out the contradictory signals from his inner ear. By night 5, he was sleeping approximately 6 hours per night. The vestibular confusion was still present. He could still feel it when he thought about it, but his brain had begun treating it as normal. By night 7, Chris was sleeping almost normally. His brain had adapted. What's remarkable is how quickly the human brain adapts to impossible circumstances. Within 1 week, Chris's brain had essentially learned that the vestibular signals were meaningless. It had reduced the priority it assigned to inner ear information and increased reliance on visual and proprioceptive body awareness information. This is an example of neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself and adapt to new circumstances. Scientists believe this adaptation happens through a process called sensory reweighting. Your brain has learned through millions of years of evolution how to weight different sensory inputs. Vision counts for X%, inner ear counts for Y%, etc. But in zero gravity, this weighting must change. Your brain, through repeated exposure, adjusts these weights. Visual information becomes more important. Inner ear information becomes less important. After 1 week, Chris was sleeping relatively normally. After 2 weeks, the vestibular confusion had diminished substantially. After 1 month, it was barely noticeable. By the end of the first month, says Chris, I'd almost forgotten what the panic felt like. It had become normal to me. Dreams and the unconscious mind. But adaptation didn't eliminate all sleep-related challenges. Chris's dreams were affected, Most of his dreams involved falling. Sometimes he was falling from the ISS. Sometimes he was falling through infinite void. Sometimes he was falling geometrically, falling in directions that don't exist. These dreams were so vivid that they often woke him up in panic. But interestingly, the panic was different from the first night panic. This was psychological fear, not vestibular panic. My dreams felt like they were processing the reality of my situation, says Chris. My unconscious mind was trying to make sense of falling through infinite void. This makes evolutionary sense. For millions of years, humans evolved with gravity. Our unconscious mind is deeply programmed with gravitational assumptions. Even though Chris's conscious mind had adapted to zero gravity, his dreaming mind, his unconscious mind, was still processing the impossible situation. Over time, as Chris spent more days in space, his dreams gradually changed. Instead of dreams about falling, he started having dreams about Earth, dreams about his family, dreams about normal situations. After a month or two, says Chris, my dreams normalized. My unconscious mind had accepted the reality of space. Sleep deprivation affects more than just mood and cognition. It affects physical health. During Chris's first week with limited sleep, his immune system showed signs of suppression. His cortisol levels, stress hormone, were elevated. His blood pressure was slightly high. Additionally, sleep deprivation affected his cardiovascular system. His heart rate variability, an indicator of heart health, was reduced. His body was essentially in a low-grade stress state due to lack of sleep. Over the long term, this would be problematic. But after 1 week, when Chris's sleep stabilized to 5 to 6 hours per night, these physical markers began improving. By the end of the first month, Chris's physical health markers were back to normal despite the reduced sleep. Your body is remarkably adaptable, explains Dr. Sarah Williams, NASA's chief astronaut physician. Astronauts get less sleep in space than on Earth, typically 5 to 6 hours instead of 7 to 8, but after adaptation, their bodies function normally on this reduced sleep. Chris's sleep challenges weren't entirely due to the vestibular issue. The ISS environment itself made sleep difficult. First, there were sounds. The ISS hums constantly with equipment noise. Ventilation systems whoosh. Computers beep. Electrical systems hum. Water pumps cycle. Occasionally, external equipment operates. For an astronaut trying to sleep, these sounds are an acoustic environment completely unlike anything on Earth. Additionally, there's the visual environment. Chris slept with an eye mask, but some light still penetrated the edges. Through small gaps, he could see the station's instruments and screens, all illuminated and glowing. Most problematically, there are alarms. The ISS has multiple alarm systems. If equipment malfunctions, alarms sound. Most are minor alarms that require attention but aren't emergencies. But the alarm system doesn't distinguish between emergency alarm and minor alert. During Chris's first week, he was awakened multiple times by alarms. Each time, his stress hormones spiked. Even though mission control had confirmed the alarms were false, Chris's primitive brain didn't care. The alarm meant potential danger, and his body responded accordingly. After the first week, Chris's brain had learned which alarms were important. He could sleep through minor alarms and wake up only for serious ones. But this learning took time. Beyond the physiological effects of vestibular confusion and sleep deprivation, there was a psychological dimension. Chris, for the first time in his life, was experiencing genuine existential terror. Floating 400 kilometers above Earth, separated from everything he knew, experiencing impossible sensations his brain had never evolved to handle. It was psychologically profound. "The first week," says Chris, "I experienced a level of psychological stress that I've rarely experienced before or since. It wasn't just about not sleeping. It was about confronting the fundamental limitations of human physiology." This existential dread fed into his sleep problems. Even after the vestibular confusion had diminished, psychological anxiety kept him from sleeping soundly. Additionally, Chris experienced a profound loneliness. Everyone else on the ISS, his 4 crewmates, had adapted to space previously. They slept normally. They felt comfortable. Chris was the only one struggling. This sense of isolation, being the only person struggling while everyone else seemed fine, added a psychological burden. Mission Control, aware of this, had Chris communicate regularly with family. They encouraged him to speak about his feelings. They reminded him that what he was experiencing was normal and temporary. But knowing intellectually that the struggle was temporary didn't immediately make it easier psychologically. NASA has sophisticated systems to support astronauts' mental health. Before spaceflight, astronauts work with psychologists to prepare for the psychological challenges of space. During spaceflight, flight surgeons and mission control monitor psychological state. For Chris, having mission control aware of his sleep struggles was valuable. It normalized the experience. It allowed him to express fear without shame. Additionally, Chris had his crewmates. After several days, when Chris's struggle was evident, his crewmates offered advice and support. Some shared their own first-night experiences. One crewmate, an experienced ISS veteran, explained that his first night had been equally difficult. Knowing that even experienced astronauts had struggled with their first night gave Chris perspective. It wasn't a personal failure. It was a universal challenge of human adaptation to space. By the end of the first week, something shifted in Chris's psychology. He stopped fighting the vestibular confusion. He stopped resisting the sensations. Instead, he accepted them. "I realized I couldn't change what my inner ear was telling my brain," says Chris, "so I stopped trying to make it stop. I just accepted it as a strange sensation and moved on." This acceptance seems simple, but it's profoundly important. The moment Chris stopped treating the sensations as a problem to be solved and started treating them as just a sensation to experience, the psychological panic diminished dramatically. His sleep improved immediately. Instead of spending hours trying to sleep while fighting panic, he spent an hour and then fell asleep despite the continued sensation. "It's like my brain realized that the strange sensations weren't actually danger," explains Chris. "They were just strange. Once I accepted that strangeness, I could sleep." Chris Hadfield's first night in space and his gradual adaptation over weeks demonstrates something profound about human resilience. The human brain and body are extraordinarily adaptable. Given time and support, humans can adapt to circumstances that seem impossible. Vestibular confusion that causes panic in the first night becomes a barely noticed background sensation by the end of a month. This adaptability was crucial to early space exploration. Without it, humans couldn't survive long in space. The fact that Chris could adapt so completely, achieving not just survival but genuine comfort in an environment where humans never evolved to live, speaks to the remarkable neuroplasticity of the human brain. But this adaptability has limits. For missions longer than 6 months, the effects of space on sleep in the vestibular system become more problematic. For missions lasting years, like eventual Mars missions, better solutions will be needed, possibly artificial gravity or pharmaceutical interventions that we haven't yet developed. For now, Chris Hadfield's experience remains instructive. It shows both the challenge and the resilience. Space is hostile to human life, but humans are adaptable enough to overcome that hostility, at least for periods measured in months. Years later, Chris Hadfield still talks about that first night in space as one of the defining experiences of his life. Not because it was pleasant. It wasn't. It was terrifying and uncomfortable and psychologically challenging. But because it taught him something about himself. It showed him his own resilience. It demonstrated that even when his brain and body were experiencing impossible circumstances, he could adapt. He could push through the panic and find a way forward. That first night, says Chris, I learned that humans are capable of enduring far more than we think. That discomfort is temporary. That adaptation is possible. It's a lesson that extends far beyond space exploration. In life, we all face first nights, new circumstances that seem impossibly difficult. Chris's experience in space offers a model for adaptation. Accept the discomfort. Trust that your brain and body can adapt. Keep moving forward. And indeed, Chris did. After the first night, he slept. After the first week, he adapted. After 144 days, he had become as much a creature of space as any human has ever been. When he looked out the ISS window at Earth below, he wasn't falling through infinite void with his inner ear screaming danger. He was floating in a constructed environment, held safely by physics and engineering, observing the planet that had created him from a perspective fewer than 600 humans have ever achieved. And it all started with surviving that first impossible night